It's Jose with Oakland Latinos United, aka Oakland Latinos Unidos, on here with a new video for you guys to enjoy. Now, the video I'm going to make today is one that I have been talking about that I was going to make on my live feeds, and I'm doing it today. And that is the 40th anniversary of the documentary Children of Violence. And what is Children of Violence, you might ask? And so basically, that's a documentary that came out in 1982, 40 years ago. And it was made by Bill Jersey for PBS, or Public Broadcasting Services, or stations. And in the Bay Area, Channel 9 is the local PBS channel. And it was a very rare look at Chicano life in Oakland, California, specifically East Oakland, California. You feel me? And I've said it before, and I'll keep on saying it. When it comes to Chicanos and Raza in Northern California, we usually don't get our shine. We get ignored. And especially when it comes to the Bay Area, and especially Oakland. So this is a rare gem of life in Oakland, California at the time with Chicanos, which is rarely ever seen. So we're lucky enough to have this documentary in existence. So basically, let's get to the story of it. So in 1982, a documentary came out on PBS, like I said, and it was called Children of Violence, made by Bill Jersey. It was filmed between the years of 1981 and 1982. And basically, it was about a family called the Parkins family. And the Parkins family was a Tejano family, or a family from Texas, you know what I mean, who had migrated to Oakland to work, you know, because at the time in Texas, there wasn't a lot of work. So I've said before in some of my videos and some of my spills that a lot of Chicanos came back during World War II, 40s and 50s era, to Oakland to work in the shipyards, to work in the military jobs and in the factory jobs at the time, just like the African Americans did. And the Parkins family was definitely one of those families who came here to Oakland to work in, you know, the factory and industrial jobs that used to exist in Oakland at the time, because Oakland was a factory town. So basically, the documentary is about, like I said, a family called the Parkins family. And the main protagonist of the documentary is this guy right here. His name is Carlos Parkins. They called him Bean on the Streets, or Frijol. And he was kind of like the leader of the 60s, a gang which was known at the time. It was considered one of the biggest Chicano gangs at that time. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of what came about. Now, what they didn't talk about in the documentary was that Carlos Parkins had originally created a gang called Los Hermanos del Barrio. And Los Hermanos del Barrio was a clique that was made up of guys from all over East Oakland, specifically the 30s, the 40s, the 60s. And that gang eventually broke up. And, you know, other gangs formed, like 38, 41st, and the 60s. Now, why were they called the 60s, or Barrio Sesentas? You know what I mean? Or Barrio 60s. Well, that's because they were from the area of the 60s. They lived on 65th Ave, so they claimed basically the area between 60th and 69th Ave, hence the 60s. And one interesting thing about this gang and about this era, that this is the same era that in the same area, the 60s, you had Felix Mitchell and the 6'9" mob. You know what I mean? In the 6'9" Ville, in the projects, and also the 6'5" Ville. And they were a notorious drug gang at the time. And, you know, this gang, the 60s, coexisted at the same time that the 6'9" mob and those other hoods, you know, were doing their thing. You know what I mean? And basically, the 60s is an interesting area because I call it like the crossroads. Because it's kind of like the crossroads between the black neighborhoods and the Raza neighborhoods. You know, at that time, this area was mostly a black area. But there was Chicanos and Raza living there at the time. But I would say now, today, there's a lot more Raza. But at that time, you know, the Chicanos that lived there banded together and formed the gang, the 60s. You know, and they were basically the biggest gang or at least Chicano gang of Oakland at that time. Now, there were other gangs too, like Quince, there was 38, there was 41st, there was Barrio Oakland Locals, Jingletown, you know, and various other hoods that existed at the time, you know what I mean? But the 60s was the one that was making a lot of noise back then, you know what I mean? That's why they were on the documentary. Now, how Bean or Carlos Parkins, you know, got introduced to Bill Jersey and how the documentary came about, that backstory I don't really know, you know what I mean? But it is interesting that they filmed it and that they did it, because like I said, this is a rare gem. I would say it's a gem into Chicano life in Oakland. Now, another thing that you might notice in these documentaries, and even like, say, The Principal, which was another movie that was filmed around the time in Oakland, it showed homies from Oakland, is that back then, the concept of Norte and Sur wasn't a really big thing like it would become later. You know what I mean? Maybe like 8-9 years after this documentary, you know, the streets of Oakland would be full of Border Brothers, Norte, Sur, and all that stuff. But at this time, that concept didn't exist. Now, in prison, there was already Norteños, Sureños, the Nuestra Familia, the Mexican Mafia. But on the streets, at least in Oakland that I remember, they weren't pushing that line as much. It was more about barrios, it was more about hoods. And if you could see, they wore blue, they wore red. They wore whatever color they wanted. There wasn't no color structure or lines at that time. And if you really watch the documentary, you hear them just talk about their hoods. You don't really hear them talk about, I'm a norteño, I'm a sureño. You don't hear that in the documentary. You know, and that's Bean walking down 65th Ave right there. Actually, that building's still there. And, you know, it was a different time for sure. I was a little kid during this time, so I don't remember this era very well, you know, because I was really little. But the documentary, like I said, it showed a lot of different things. It showed them hanging out on 65th Ave. It showed them hanging out all up and down the 60s, on 64th, right there by where the Quickway used to be and the McDonald's is now. You see them at St. Bernard's or San Bernardo Church right there on 63rd. You see them hanging out in front of there. You see them cruising around, you know what I mean, around East 14th in their lowriders, you know. And you see them kicking it at the Quarter Pound Giant Burger on East 14th and 37th Ave. Back in the days, that was like the the lowrider spot where everybody hung out. And they used to cruise on East 14th. This is back when lowriding was a thing in Oakland, you know what I mean? A lot of people don't recognize that lowriding used to be a big thing with Chicanos in Oakland, especially at San Antonio Park and at Quarter Pound Giant Burger and down East 14th. You feel me? And this was that era, you know what I mean? And like I said, it was a rare look at Chicanos in Oakland at the time. Now, I would say the documentary is a very hard-hitting documentary because it shows a hardcore look into what it was like at the time. You know what I mean? According to the documentary, they had beef with a Filipino gang. I don't know what the Filipino gang was called, but the Filipino gang had killed some of their homies, you know what I mean? And they were going after this Filipino gang throughout the documentary. Another thing that was mentioned in the documentary was that they had beef with the 41st Cycles, another gang, which we'll talk about as well in a minute. And you know, back then it was more like they had funk with barrios, they had funk with different hoods, different neighborhoods, and that's how it was, you know what I mean? In Oakland at the time, it was more about barrios, more about hoods, you know, more about turfs, and yeah, that was basically 1982, 1981 in Oakland, California, and this documentary showed it all. Now, this woman right here was Carlos Parkins' mom, and she was she was a lady from Texas who had moved to Oakland, and she was the mom of Carlos Parkin, and they had this really big family. Now, he had a lot of brothers, you know what I mean? And her name again was Olivia Parkin, I believe. And Carlos had a lot of brothers, you know what I mean? He had a brother named Dancing Dan. He had a brother named Arthur Parkins. I think that's some of them right here in the picture. There's Olivia, and I think that's Bean's dad. You know, and they had a big family. They had like 10 kids, I think. You know, and you know, the poor lady had to suffer her kids being involved in gangs and drugs and you know, the violence of the game in the streets of Oakland, you know what I mean? And you see it throughout the documentary. Now, in the documentary, they show this man right here. That was Carlos' brother, Jerry Parkins. And he died in the while they were filming the documentary. I think they showed him very briefly in the documentary. They didn't show him much, but I know they did show him a couple times. And basically, what the story goes that he was trying to see his kids or something like that in San Leandro. And the baby's mama called the police, and then the Alameda County Sheriff came, and he supposedly got into an altercation with the Alameda County Police, with the Alameda County Sheriff. They beat him up, took him to, I'm not sure if they took him to Santa Rita or where they took him, and they found him hanging in a cell. Now, they claim that he had committed suicide, but the family believed that the police killed him. What really happened, we will never know. But that was Jerry Parkins right there. And you see his funeral in the documentary at CP Banyan right there on 69th and East 14th. You know, famous funeral home that a lot of people from East Oakland know, right across the street from Lockwood School. And yeah, man, that was a sad part of the documentary. You know, this poor lady, Olivia Parkins, was going through a lot. And she lost her son, you know, to police violence at the time. And that's Carlos Parkin. That's the homie Twink. I know him. I grew up with him. R.I.P. That's Dancing Dan. That's the homie Frank Spider from 36. You know, that's the homies right there from back in the days. Now, in the documentary, they show this gang as well. This is the 41st Cycles. And they were a gang from 41st Ave. You know, they were from the 40s, basically. And that was their territory where they hung out. Now, according to the documentary, they had beef with the 60s back in that time. How serious that beef was, I don't know. I know that it seemed like they had a lot of beef with the Filipinos, too. The Filipinos had killed one of their homies named Julian. And, you know, the 41st Cycles throughout the documentary, you see them talking about the 60s. They say something that they don't act civilized and they act crazy. And they basically ended with having a football game at a school between the 60s and 41st at, I thought it was Fremont High, but looking back on it, it was actually Encinal High in Alameda, where they filmed the last part of the documentary. And they were playing, that wasn't the last part, but it was toward the end. They were playing a game of football between two gangs, you know what I mean? And I remember back in the days, different hoods used to do that. Different black hoods and Chicano hoods used to play football or baseball, you know what I mean? They would have like a little peace treaty going on. And, you know, that's how it was done, you know what I mean? It wasn't always necessarily violence. You feel me? But yeah, man, a lot of the people that came on the documentary, you know, people have asked me whatever happened to them. You know, I know that Bean is still alive. And this is a picture of me and Bean 10 years ago. You know what I mean? I met him, no, it was more than 10 years ago, because it had to have been like 2011 or 2010. They had a special presentation with Homies Empowerment in East Oakland, over there by High Street, behind the Cardenas or Mi Pueblo. They had a special presentation of the documentary Children of Violence. And we went to see it. I met Bean. And, yeah, it was hella cool, you feel me? And, you know, you hear a lot of people on the documentary at the beginning. You see like an introduction where they're introducing different folks. You know, they're saying like Twinkie, a local Ferrigno, you know, a local Poochie. What else he says? Like God of Hellfire, Sapo, you know, and different names that you hear on there. Now, Big Mama Lee from the 60s, she was a female member, like a Chola. Now, I could tell you that, this man right here, who was the homie Twinkie, he passed away. You know, he passed away some years back. Also, the homie Sapo, my brother knew him. He passed away. Another guy who came on there who said local Ferrigno, he actually went on to live a pretty successful life. He actually became a DJ, and he was one of the only Chicanos on Soul Beat back in the days. And you might remember him. His name is Gary Baca. They called him the G-Spot. You know, he was very popular around the Bay Area, especially on, he used to be on KPFA, on KPOO, and on Soul Beat. He went on to live a pretty good life. The lady Big Mama Lee, the Chola who came on the documentary, I heard she was a crazy girl from people that knew her. I heard she passed away. You know what I mean? I know that, Dancing Dan, who was, Carlos Parkins' brother, passed away. And, I know that the mom, Olivia Parkin, she passed away, I believe, in a car accident, if I was told, sometime in the late 80s, you know, which, you know, that's unfortunate, you know, because she she seemed like she was a good woman that suffered a lot. And it's just too bad that she died in an unfortunate situation. But I had heard she died on the 580 back in like the late 80s over there, kind of like somewhere around Fruitvale, or like somewhere near between Fruitvale and Highland Hospital area of the freeway. But yeah, man, that's unfortunate. R.I.P. to her. You know what I mean? And you know, some of the other members I believe are alive, you know what I mean, and kicking. You know, but a lot of homies that were on that documentary passed away. Some of them went to the Pinta. Some of them became big members, you know what I mean? I can't say no names, but I know that a few dudes on this documentary became like structure and NF dudes for sure. You know what I mean? In the Pintas, you know, and I believe a couple of them were mentioned on Boxer Mendoza's book, actually. A couple of guys who were in the documentary. But yeah, man, so that concludes the 40th anniversary of Children of Violence, a documentary that came out in 1982 by Bill Jersey. You know, it was, like I said, a rare gem of a documentary, and a look at Chicano life at the time in Oakland, which is something you hardly ever see. As you can see, this was the era of the Cholos. I always tell people in Oakland, we used to be straight up about the Cholo life, the Ben Davis, the Dickies, the Guinos. You know what I mean? The Cortezes, the Stacey Adams, you know, the lowriders cruising around, you know what I mean? Before the sideshow culture had hit Oakland, you know, homies out there were choloing it out, for sure. At least the Chicanos were. And people were proud of that. You know, everybody was proud to be Chicano in Oakland at that time, from what I remember, you feel me? It was something you were proud of. I used to hear a lot about the Chicano pride and Chicano power at that time when I was a kid. So definitely a different era in Oakland. It was the precursor of a lot of the gangs and hoods and turfs that you see in Oakland today. And like I said, a rare gem. Check it out on YouTube. It is on YouTube. And yeah, man, hopefully you guys enjoyed that video. This is Jose with Oakland Latinos United.